the boards to the right thickness. Again, the inside of where the split is the outside of the box, and the outside is where the inside of the box is. Now we want to finish the inside of the box now while it's in one piece, because we'll save a lot of time. So what I'll do now, we originally flattened it with 80 grit sandpaper. So I've changed the sandpaper grit to 120 grit, and I'll sand it with 120 and then hit it with the 180 and then the 140. It's fairly straightforward. All we do again is we're on the outside and we just sand it like that. And that's all we really need to do with the sandpaper. That's 120 grit. I work my way through 120, 180 and then 240 and stop at 240. Now I've had a few emails about people, what do I do if I don't have a linisher? Before I had all my workshop going, this is how I used to flatten the board. It does take a lot longer. So it's just sandpaper glued with spray adhesive onto a bit of melamine and then screwed in on both ends. That just stops the sandpaper from lifting and you end up with a lot longer life. That's the 180 grit, 240 grit. So I work my way through. This is the 80 and that's the 120. So what I do is I start with the 80 grit, and on the outside I just sand it. This does take a lot longer, yes, but you can do without the machines. So and what you would do is you would just clamp this on your table so you can use two hands to sand it that way. Once you're finished with your 80, then you get onto your 120, you clamp that down, and you go through and you work your way up to 240 grit. So that's what you do if you don't have a linisher. Once you've sanded the outside face of the box, so not where the peaks of the mountain is, where the base of the mountain is on both sides, we then go back and put the rebate. So I'll just go sand this before we get into the rebate. I've got a Triton router underneath, and this is a slot cutter, a 1/4 inch slot cutter. What we're trying to achieve here is to put a slot on the base of the box to hold the solid panel box base in. We want to be about 5 mils from that bottom lip, so we want to get the bottom cutting surface about 5 mils, half a centimetre off the base of the table. Now I've just created a little fence, a zero tolerance fence, and we want the depth of the rebate in there about 5 mils as well, half a centimetre. So what I'll do is I'll just tighten that, and then I'll do a test cut with a piece of MDF, scrap piece of MDF, before we move on to the timber. This is just a scrap piece of MDF that I use as a test cut before I cut the real thing. So I just switch on the router, and that's what we've got. Sorry, the dust extractor is not attached to the router table at the moment, just for this video. But yeah, we want to cut it so that we've got about 5 mils. That's about 4 mils, so I'll just give it a slight nudge. 4 mils by 5 mils, so that's a bit low, so I'll just adjust it a bit higher. So now we've got a depth of 5 mils, and 5 mils above the base of the box. Now with the finished box, there's only about 3 mils because we sand about 2 mils of it off later on. So now when we're routing, we want to be routing on the outside face. So on this side, on the outside face, as you can see, it's being sanded to 240 grit and it's nice and shiny. So we just want to put it on the outside, and we want the actual writing to be up. So we're going through the table that way, and rather than that way, we actually want to go that way because we want to be on the base of the mountains. a nice little rebate just to hold the box base on. I won't go through the other one. Okay, this is my miter saw docking station. What I've done is the miter saw is actually fixed into the cabinetry. I can't actually move it, and there actually isn't enough room to actually spin or turn the angles that we're working with. I was taught pretty early on not to turn the actual blade. Get it 90 degrees and get it true, cutting 90 degrees every time. And if you want to cut an angle, then you build a jig to cut the angle, and that way you'll get a perfect angle cut every time. So for a miter joint, I've just got this little jig. It's fairly straightforward. It's just a piece of a melamine with a stop that is screwed into the end there. Now I've just got a little rebate in there so that if there's any little sawdust or anything, it doesn't play havoc with the jig. Now that just bolts in like that. Now every time it goes in, it's nearly 90 or nearly a perfect miter cut. Now when you're making the jig, what you do is you just grab a piece of scrap, piece of timber. This is radiata, and you cut it a little bit longer. You put in your first screw there just to have a pivot point, and you mark a 45-degree angle there. You try to get it as close as you can, but rather than screwing it in, what you do is you build another base behind it so that you can do a fine adjustment so that you've got a perfect miter. You screw in this point and you screw in the back supporting piece, and then you put a block in there where you think the 90 degrees is, and then you just put a little screw in there to hold it in place. This is zero tolerance, so there will be no chip out every time you cut. Now what you do is you just grab a scrap piece of timber, and with your first cut it'll just trim off that piece so that you've got zero tolerance, and it may be the angle might be a bit big or a bit small, and all you do is you just put a few spaces on the back there, and you just adjust the screw until you've got a perfect miter. And once you've got the perfect miter, then you just screw it off of another piece, and that way the block won't ever move, or it shouldn't ever move. And once it's in place, I've got a clamp on my drop saw. That clamps in there, and I grab another clamp, which then clamps there, and that way the jig's nice and solid. Now that the jig's in and it's clamped down, what you need to do is a test cut before you do a batch cut. So what I do is I just grab a piece of scrap MDF, I put 2 miters on there, I check to make sure they're square, and if they're square then I go and cut the rest of the batch. You don't need to keep testing the fence if you've got a well-built fence that doesn't move, but when you're in the middle of a batch, when after smoke or after lunch, just test the cut again, and that way you can't go wrong. So I've got a dust extractor on the back of this drop saw, and then I just press angle there, and the miter there, and then I get my square out and I test to make sure it's true. Alright, so there it is. And it is a perfect miter. Okay, so now that we know that it's cut and true, we then cut the box sides.